Hello, hello. This is episode 2 of Better Every Day. Today we're talking about soft men and safe spaces, vulnerable masculinity and emotional safety. Let me ask you a question. What good is a covering that can't bend? I just want to pose that question to you before we go ahead and get started. I want to prepare you for what we're getting ready to discuss because I admit it might be a little heavy, but I also admit it may very well be needed. I want to start tonight with a question. Now, I never heard this question asked in church services or anything like that, but I want to ask you all so we can have a conversation about it. What does it cost a man to be emotionally available? Not what scripture says about it or not what therapy or your favorite meme says, but what does it actually cost a man in his community, in his marriage, in his professional relationships, even his own interior life to be emotionally present? Because I've watched men pay that cost, and I want to talk about what that buys. I've also watched men refuse to pay that, and I want to talk about what that costs instead. Welcome back to Better Every Day. I'm Kory Miles. This is episode 2, and tonight we're talking about soft men and safe spaces. Now, let me describe the men most of our culture has produced. He's capable, he shows up, he provides, he protects in the physical and in the financial sense, right? He's present in body and largely absent in interior. He doesn't cry, and if he does, he ain't doing that where anybody can see. He handles things, he doesn't talk about things. He doesn't always know what the things are, but because naming them requires a level of interior access he really wasn't taught ever to develop. He's not a bad man, but he is a product. And he was produced by a culture that told him that the measure of a man is what he can withstand without breaking. That emotion is weakness, that vulnerability is exposure, and that a real man handles his pain quietly and just keeps pushing forward. And then that same man wonders why his wife says she doesn't know him, why his children describe him as unreachable, why he has friends, but not a single person he can call at 2 a.m. That's not strength. That's isolation, wearing the costume of strength. Now, I want to be very careful here because this conversation has been hijacked in 2 different directions, and I want to make sure that I talk about those as well. Because, listen, direction 1 is certain cultural messaging that says traditional masculinity is toxic and should be dismantled entirely. The answer is to feminize men and make them more emotional, more responsive, and more like the culture has decided women are. And the other direction is certain religious spaces push back and say real men don't cry, don't process, don't show weakness, and they use scripture to defend that stance. And both of these answers, in my opinion, are wrong. The right answer is something a little different, and it's something that I want to call grounded availability. Hold on, stay with me, stay with me. Not soft as in weak, and not hard as in closed, but grounded with a capacity to be present, showing emotion without being destroyed by it, available, actually accessible to the people who need to access you. Now, let me take you somewhere in scripture that I don't think gets enough attention in conversations about masculinity, right? I want to take you to John 11. Again, I'm promise you I'm not trying to preach, but I just want to highlight this. Lazarus has died, and Mary falls at Jesus' feet weeping. And the text says in verse 33, when Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. He was troubled. And that word in Greek means deep internal groaning, a stirring of the spirit. And Jesus felt that. And he was moved then also in verse 35 to himself have wept. Not a stoic acknowledgement that death is unfortunate, not a quick prayer to and move hurried to resurrection. He wept. He let grief reach him in public, in front of a crowd. This is the Son of God, the same man who cleared the temple with a whip, who confronted the Pharisees directly, who walked through a crowd trying to kill him without flinching. The same man who wept at the tomb of his friend. Now, that's not contradiction. I would like to say that that is a full picture of what grounded, available, masculine leadership looks like. Masculinity is not void of humanity. Now, Psalms 22, David opens this song with, my God, why have you forsaken me? This is the psalm that Jesus quotes from the cross as well. It is a psalm of desolation, feeling abandoned, honest, raw, expressed anguish directed at God. David is considered the greatest king in Israel's history. Military record unmatched, leadership legendary, wrote dozens of psalms of lament, grief, emotional honesty that he expressed openly, publicly, and with full vulnerability. This is biblical truth. This is biblical pattern, not emotional performance, not suppression, but honest interior access expressed in appropriate ways. The message many men have received is that strength means not feeling. And that's not biblical. That's not truth. It's cultural, though. And it's costing men marriages, their children, their friendships, and even ultimately their health. Now, here's the other side of this conversation that doesn't get enough attention. Vulnerability requires somewhere safe to land. I've talked to women who say their husbands won't open up, won't share, won't be emotionally available. And I understand that frustration. I get it. I really, really do. But I've also talked to men who have tried, who made an attempt at vulnerability and it was used against them in an argument, in front of children, maybe even in public to prove a point, to establish emotional leverage. And they decided, consciously or not, that cost was too high and they refused to pay it anymore. So let me say something to both sides very, very clearly. To my fellas out there, the absence of a guaranteed safe space is not permission to stay closed. You don't wait for perfect conditions before you develop emotional capacity. That's like refusing to develop a skill until someone guarantees they'll appreciate it, right? You don't want to do that. Your interior development is your responsibility regardless of the response you receive. Now, to my ladies, if you want a man who is emotionally available to you, you have to become a person he believes is a safe space to be vulnerable with. Now, that means what he shares in vulnerability doesn't become ammunition for your gun emotionally. It means processing his attempts graciously, even when they're clumsy. It means creating conditions that make the thing you want possible. And this is a mutual responsibility. Now, let me pause here because I know y'all probably arguing with me right now, but I want to name a third dynamic here that nobody's really talking about. Some men are not emotionally unavailable because of cultural conditioning or past wounds. Some men are emotionally available because they've never been required to develop interior access, because everyone around them has managed their emotional environment for them. Now, let me explain. There are women who have been so relentlessly emotionally available, so consistently the one who processes everything for everyone, that the man in the relationship has never had to develop that capacity for himself. He outsourced his emotional life. And then she's exhausted and he's confused and they're both frustrated. Healthy covering doesn't mean emotional management of another person. It means emotional stability within yourself that creates space for others to be seen. Now, let me tell you what happens in a relationship and in an organization when a man becomes emotionally grounded and available. What happens then is the people he leads become more honest. When the person with the most authority in the room demonstrates that it's safe to be real, everyone else feels the permission to be real too. Organizations run by emotionally available leaders have higher trust, better communication, and lower turnover. This is documented across leadership research. Don't take my word for it. You can look it up yourself. But the point is, when his partner becomes less defensive, a woman knows that her man can handle emotional weight without shutting down, deflecting, or even retaliating. When she believes that his presence is genuinely safe, she relaxes in the relationship rather than bracing for that relationship. The control mechanisms that show up in women who don't feel safe, like managing and over-explaining and the testing, those things decrease in the presence of genuine emotional groundedness. His children learn what healthy interior life looks like because children model what they observe. A father who demonstrates emotional vocabulary, who expresses appropriate grief, who can say, "I was wrong," and mean it, that father is forming children who will carry those capacities into their adult relationships. And he himself becomes less lonely, right? Now, listen, this is what breaks my heart about most emotionally unavailable men: the loneliness, the isolation dressed as independence, right? I've been there myself, and I know some of my guys have as well. The performance of okay when the interior reality is anything but that. A man who can be known, actually known, is not weak. He's actually free. I want to close with this question. What good is a covering that can't bend? A covering that is rigid breaks under pressure. A covering that is hard only provides protection, but it can't provide warmth. The best covering is the kind of people who actually want to live under, one that is strong enough to be trusted and flexible enough to still be human. That's not soft. That's actually whole. That's it for today, session 2. We're going to talk about going into a territory next time that might make some of us uncomfortable. We're going to talk about submission. Why has that word been used as a weapon when it's designed to be a gift? Drop your comments. Let's begin to engage in conversation about soft men in safe spaces. What resonated with you? What questions came up? And when we see you guys again, we're going to be talking about session 3 and discussing submission. I'll see you next Wednesday.